In this video then, we'll look at the concept of a scalar tuple.
Or perhaps it's pronounced tuple. It sounds a silly word to me, but it's really a continuation of the sequence of double, triple, and I suppose a quadtuple. A tuple just means a collection of values. For example, in Scala, in round brackets, 64, 23.543 is a tuple. And a tuple can have, sort of, as many items inside it as you like. And they can be any type as well. So here I have a 3-element tuple containing these 3 strings. And they can be any type you like. You could have objects inside a tuple or whatever. Now the great thing about tuples in Scala is that they have a very neat syntax. I don't know if you know any Scala, but the keyword val in Scala means you are declaring a value. And the important thing is a tuple is just defined using simple round brackets. So there's no new keyword here, there's no fiddling around with collections or lists or elements or whatever. So it is a neat syntax. Really what we have here is not that much different to a regular collection like a list, for example. But the idea is that a tuple is generally a small collection of values that you're not planning on modifying. So my example here, for example, sounds like a good one. If I wanted to store some coordinates, rather than messing around creating a new class just to store a coordinate, I could very quickly and simply use round brackets and pass in the first and second coordinate that I'm storing. So it's kind of a lightweight way of storing related values together without the overhead of having to go and create a class for them. Now it might sound that's a bit anti-object orientation, but I'm sure you've had a situation in the past where you've just got a couple of values that you want to store together, but it doesn't really justify creating a whole new class just to do that small requirement. Now unfortunately, of course, they're not supported in Java, or at least by Java 9, tuples are not part of the Java syntax. Now I think it would be great if I could just say my value is 9,3, just like that. Well, in fact, we sort of can, because in Scala, this is roughly how you would have written this in Scala. But actually in Scala, this is just syntactic sugar, as it's often called. If you've come across that phrase before, it just means that this is just a simplified way of writing something that you can write in a more traditional format. It turns out that in Scala, all this line of code would convert into, when you run the compiler, it converts automatically into creating a new object of type, and the type is called tuple2. And the compiler will work out, because you've got 2 elements here, that you want an instance of this class called tuple2. Now, of course, this isn't compiling, but you might be surprised to see if I hover over this, it is actually giving me an import for this. It's not part of Java, but actually if I select this first fix, import tuple2, can you see on line 12 that this tuple2 is actually a predefined class in a package called Scala? Now what's happening here, you wouldn't get that as normal standard Java, but because we're using Apache Spark, and Apache Spark has a lot of dependent libraries and its transitive dependencies, we've sort of inherited that library, and we can use that library in our code. So this is now very nearly compiling. Of course, the only problem is, unlike Scala, I can't just say val my value equals. I've got to be explicit here on the left-hand side about what the type of this object is. So I've got to say tuple2 on this side as well. And finally, you might be able to see that we have a warning here. And the warning, as usual, is because the tuple2 class is a generic class, and we do, for convenience, really need to tell Java what the types of data, what these 2 types actually are. Now we know that the first element in here is an integer, but the second element, it wouldn't be obvious from this code, but that's actually a double. It needs to be because it's a square root. And then again on the right hand side, in the old days we used to have to repeat that, but we can just use the open and close angle brackets. Now we have one just remaining compile error because I think the compiler's confused that 3 looks very much like an integer. So if I put 3.0 in there, yeah, that's all compiling now. So, okay, well the point of all that is that we can use tuple2s in Java as long as we have somehow got this Scala library on our class path, and we do. So the point of all that is that instead of using this integer with square roots, what I could do instead, rather than inventing a whole new class, is I could have just used straight out of the box a tuple2, which is going to be of type integer double, and this is going to be the value followed by the square root of that value. And then we will need to change the left hand side. Now you're probably not going to like this, and I admit I don't like it either. This is one of the areas where Java is much more ugly than Scala. We need to put the type in here in the angle brackets, and you can work this out for yourself. The type is actually a tuple2, but itself has a type of integer comma double. As we've seen elsewhere though, because we've declared the type here on the left hand side, Java can infer the type here, so I didn't have to use integer double there. I could have just used the angle brackets. Now I don't know how you feel about this. You might have actually preferred my previous version when I was using my custom class, this integer with square roots. You could certainly argue that integer with square root is a lot more kind of object oriented. The reason I'm showing you these tuples is you're going to find tuples used all over the place in the Spark API. So you're going to have to get used to them anyway. And the reason they're used everywhere in the Scala API is that they're lovely to work with in Scala. Very simple syntax, as you saw on my previous caption. So their usage is all over the Spark API, and therefore the use of tuples in Spark programming, even if you're working in Java, the use of tuples is really extensive. I think that these tuples are really the only ugly part of working in Spark in Java, and it's something that you'll get used to, and you just have to kind of live with it if you want to work within Java. So I think that's it for tuples on this chapter, but I should mention that we don't just have tuple2s. If you wanted to hold a tuple containing, say, 5 elements, then you absolutely can, because there is a tuple 5, and you would have to put 5 elements in like so, and it can't resolve it to a type because I haven't yet imported it. So as you can see there is a tuple 5. Now you might be wondering what's the limit of this, and for some bizarre reason that I have never understood, you can go as far as a tuple 22. Just to hover over that, you can see that there really does exist there a scala.tuple22. Now I can't imagine anyone would ever want to go up to 22. I mean, these are difficult to work with by the time you get to 3 or 4, but it's there in the library. I don't know why they chose 22. So to summarize on this chapter then, a tuple in Scala is a very useful concept because it's very good syntax, basically. It's very lightweight syntax and very easy to work with. Because Spark is written in Scala, these tuples are used all over the place in the Scala API, and they have transferred across into the Java API. So they're not particularly pleasant to work with, frankly, but they're there, and you'll get used to them. In the next chapter, we're going to look at something called a pair RDD. And once you understand tuples, then pair RDDs are really simple to work with. So I'll see you in the next chapter.